Hi, I'm Stuart from the Norfolk Honey Company and welcome to another Beekeeping Basics. So today we're going to follow on from last week's session where we looked at some of the various pests that we can find interfering with our colonies, and this week we're going to start looking at diseases. Particularly this week I wanted to take a look at the adult bee diseases, and those include diseases such as Nosema, Acarine, and we'll also take a look at the effects that Varroa can have on a colony. So if this is your first time watching one of my videos, you're very welcome. Please do consider subscribing. It would be great to have you join our growing community. And if you have any questions, please do pop them in the comments section below, where I promise to answer all that I get. So let's take a look at some of these honeybee diseases. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is Nosema, which comes in two forms. Nosema apis and Nosema ceranae. Now, Nosema is classed as a microsporidian, which is a member of the fungi family, and it infects the honeybee's gut. So the spores are taken in by the honeybee while it's maybe cleaning through the colony, cleaning up comb, cleaning out cells, and pass through down into the gut of the honeybee, where they then multiply and become a real problem for the honeybee, causing the bee to become lethargic and unable to fly any real distances. It may also cause dysentery, so you might find on the outside of the hive some spotting where the bees have tried to go out on a cleansing flight but haven't been able to get very far away from the hive, and so defecate around and on top of the beehive. You might also find this inside the colony on top of the top bars and on some of the comb in really extreme cases. If you check out the microscopy series that I've been releasing on a Friday evening, you'll see that just recently I've actually produced a video all about Nosema and taking a look at the Nosema spores underneath the microscope. So it'd be worth having a look at that to see what the spores look like and to just see the whole process of how you would identify Nosema in your honeybee colony. But the important thing is, if you check on your bees around this time of the year in the winter and find that you've got spotting effects on the outside of the hive, so this is kind of streaks where the bee poo has fallen down and just landed on top of the hive. It might be on the roof. I have had instances where the entire roof is completely spotted with bee poop, so check that out. If you find that you've got bees crawling around the front entrance in a very lethargic way, then that could also indicate that you've got a Nosema problem. So it would then be worth collecting a sample of bees, and again in the microscopy video I talk about how you collect the bees, and there's also another video that I've produced which will show you how to collect a sample of bees. And once you've got that sample, you can then get it tested and check to see if you have a Nosema problem. If you have got a Nosema problem, here in the UK there are no authorised treatments that you can use on them, and the best way that you can help your bees is in the spring doing a comb exchange, either a Bailey comb exchange, or just, if it's a light infection, you could just maybe change 3 or 4 of the combs, put in some fresh foundation, feed them up and give them a chance to draw that comb. But if it's in severe cases, it might be a case of either doing a full Bailey comb exchange or maybe even doing a shook swarm. But those are quite extreme, and if the colony is already weak, you might need to reduce it down into a nuke box just to maintain the colony warmth and integrity, feed them well, and once they start to build up again, you can then pop them back into a clean hive and gradually build up the number of frames that they're using. It will have an effect on your honey crop, especially if you have to do a full shook swarm Bailey comb exchange or even reduce them down into a nuke box. So the idea really is to make sure that you've got good healthy colonies going into the winter, so that any small amount of disease doesn't grow and become a real problem for that colony through the winter, when perhaps they can't get out and go on cleansing flights and end up spreading the disease throughout the colony. So really the work starts in the spring in terms of making sure that you have a good colony ready to go through the following winter. So you should always think will this colony be strong enough and healthy enough to get through the next winter and work towards the end of the autumn period, so that your bees are really strong and healthy, so that you know that they're going to be able to survive the coming winter. So next we move on to the Acarine mite. It's become a less frequent problem for me and for a lot of other beekeepers, because it appears that the Acarine mite is affected by the treatments that we use for Varroa. So it could be that in using treatments for Varroa we're also getting rid of the Acarine mite, which for those that use treatments is a bonus. But if you don't use any treatments for Varroa, then the Acarine mite could well be something that will cause you a problem, and it's important that you know what to look for and how to look for the actual mite itself. Once again, I have a video that shows the whole process of dissection of a honeybee for the investigation of looking for an Acarine mite, and it is a slightly more complicated process than the Nosema test, but it can be done, and it's quite an interesting dissection to perform. So if you're interested in taking your beekeeping to another level and using a microscope, then it would be worth having a look at that video. So the Acarine mite is a tiny mite that only occupies the first thoracic trachea of the honeybee, and that's found at the front of the thorax. So if you recall, we have the head, the thorax, and then the abdomen, and if you look towards the front end of the thorax under a magnifying glass, you'll see a tiny little hole called a spiracle, and it's the entrance to the first thoracic trachea, and that's where the Acarine mite resides. So what happens is the Acarine mite is spread by contact. So if, for instance, your bees already have an infection, they could well find that moving around the colony, those bees that are already infected are going to spread it to other bees within the colony. It might be that you have some form of drifting. If, for instance, for those of you that are brand new to beekeeping, if you were to line your beehives up all facing the same direction in a straight line, well, let's say you've got 5 hives, all numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's a windy day and the bees are out flying. The bees from hive number 3 in the middle potentially could drift one way or the other depending on the strength of the wind and get blown into another colony, and so we call that drifting. And if that bee happens to be infected with a disease or a parasite, then that's going to then be introduced into a new colony, and there are lots of ifs and buts. But if that bee happens to brush against another bee and the Acarine mite or the Varroa mite happens to be able to crawl over and get onto another bee, then the diseases and infections can spread quite rapidly. So it's important that when you've got your beehive set out, that you don't have them in a straight line with all the entrances in the same direction, but we'll cover that off in another video. So another way that Acarine and Varroa could potentially be spread is if you're open feeding. So if you were to, say, put some sugar syrup down in a pan and allow all of your colonies to come to that one position and feed on the sugar syrup, again you have bees from different colonies in close contact, and they could then spread disease and infections and pests between themselves. If you are open feeding pollen substitute, so if you use dry pollen substitute in the spring and you put that maybe in a pan or in tubes, then again bees in close contact have the potential to spread disease to different colonies, and it's one of the reasons that I use a pollen patty in the mid to late winter period. The Acarine mite will cause symptoms very similar to Nosema, and it's also quite similar to poisoning as well. So you will have honeybees that will be wandering around outside the front entrance of the hive. They'll be lethargic, they won't be flying terribly far. You may have dead bees forming a small puddle outside the entrance to the hive on the floor. And if you find that, one of the first things that you might think is that you've got a case of poisoning. But it might not be the case. It might be that your colony has been severely infected by either Nosema or by Acarine. And one of the issues is with both of these, with perhaps the Nosema particularly, dysentery isn't always seen. So always check to see whether you've got bees that are being a little bit lethargic and are not flying terribly far, and then think in terms of Nosema and the Acarine mite. As I said earlier, the Acarine mite appears to be affected by Varroicides. So if you're using any of the authorised treatments for Varroa, then the chances are that you may well be getting rid of the Acarine mite as well. But do take a look at the video that I've produced that shows the dissection process for the Acarine mite, and you'll then see the location of the first thoracic trachea and the way that we do the dissection as well. And if you happen to be brand new to beekeeping and you're not able to either perform a dissection looking for the Acarine mite or the investigation into Nosema, if you pop to my website, I offer a service where I can do both of those for you, and I'd be happy to help. So now we move on to the Varroa mite, and this is an issue that could well occupy several hours worth of video, but today I'm just going to cover off the very basics, and then we'll look at the various forms of treatments and how you would treat for Varroa in more depth in other videos. And I have produced one or two videos showing some of the treatments, but this coming season we'll look more in depth at the various treatments that are available on an individual basis. So I hope you'll subscribe and stick with us for those. So the Varroa mite was first discovered in the United States in 1987 in Wisconsin. It was discovered in Western Europe around the late 1970s, and then in the UK in 1992. And ever since then we've been battling with the Varroa mite to try and find ways to get it out of our beehives. And we have a situation where some treatments now have allowed the Varroa mite to become resistant, and so we tend not to use those earlier treatments anymore. But as time goes by, more and more treatments are being discovered and authorised, and I would always suggest that you use an authorised treatment because of its proven scientific track record, and there are lots of them out on the market, so you should be able to easily obtain some. If you're not using an authorised Varroicide and you've chosen to go down the natural beekeeping path, then that's fine. That's everybody is entitled to keep their bees in the way that they see fit, and there are methods that you can use, such as comb trapping, drone brood removal, icing sugar to shake over the bees. And I know that there are various other methods that people have used, which I hope to give a try at some point, but for me, using the Varroicides is the most effective way to keep my bees healthy at the moment, but I'm always open to looking at new ideas. And if you personally use something that I've not mentioned, or that you'd like to share with everybody, then please do put it down in the comments below, because I'm always interested in how other people are keeping their bees and how other beekeepers are using different systems and different processes and different products to keep their bees healthy, because fundamentally all I want to do is to keep my bees healthy. So the way that the Varroa mite causes so many problems with our honeybee colonies is the fact that once it gets into a colony, it multiplies by reproducing in the sealed cells of the honeybee, and once your Varroa numbers hit a particular level, then you'll find that you'll get a massive eruption of Varroa in that colony. The health of the colony will dwindle rapidly, and ultimately it will lead to the death of the colony. So it's important that we keep the Varroa numbers under control and manage them as best we can. One of the other issues with Varroa is that it can act as a vector for viruses. So we can have viruses that affect the bees carried by the Varroa and then infecting our honeybee colonies as well. So it's not just the Varroa mite that will cause a problem with your colony. It could well introduce viruses that will also cause problems. So for instance, chronic bee paralysis virus is one that has a well-known association with Varroa. And here is a short video clip of one of my colonies from a year or two ago, which had chronic bee paralysis virus. And you can see in the clip that the bees' abdomens have become hairless, they've become shiny, and you can see that the bees are shaking quite a lot. And this is a good indicator that the bees are suffering from chronic bee paralysis virus. It's not something that we can identify ourselves because it needs a laboratory diagnosis. But if you do suspect you've got a problem and at any point you're really concerned about your bees, then here in the UK I would definitely contact your regional or seasonal bee inspector, or contact the National Bee Unit, and I'll place a link down in the description below for the contact details for the National Bee Unit. Elsewhere in the world I'm not really too sure what you have in place, so again it would be really interesting to find out from you whether you have bee inspectors in your area, whether you're in contact with your bee inspectors, and what kind of service you get from them. Do they charge? Is it a free service? Here in the UK it's a free service, and if you register on the National Bee Unit's website called BeeBase, then you can then have information sent to you. If disease is found in your area, you can get an email from them to notify you that they found one of the brood diseases, and then you can take appropriate action. So with Varroa, it's important that we try to manage it as best we can. The Varroa mites will enter the cell of the honeybee and look to take advantage of the maximum amount of time that they can in a sealed cell in order to reproduce as many other Varroa mites as they possibly can. And so one of the areas that we can affect them is by using drone comb to produce a batch of drone, and once the Varroa get into the drone cells, they're then sealed for a longer period than with the workers. If you recall back to one of the earlier videos, so if we take a look at the chart again, you'll see that the workers are sealed on day 9 and the drones are sealed on day 10, but then they maintain their development in a sealed cell for a further period of time, and it's the drones that have the longer time in the cells. So the Varroa will preferentially select the drone cells over the worker cells because they can spend longer time reproducing and maturing within that cell until the drone emerges, and then the adult Varroa can come out of the cell and go off, find another cell, mate, and so the whole process continues. So we can use a mechanical system whereby we would use a frame that has drone foundation in it, and if the bees draw the drone foundation out, you can then pop the queen into a frame cage where she's only got the drone cells to be able to lay eggs into. She'll then lay eggs into those, you can release the queen, that frame will then be vulnerable to Varroa, and hopefully if it's placed towards the centre of the colony, a lot of Varroa will migrate to those cells, enter the cells, the drone cells are then capped, and once the cells are capped you can then remove that frame and destroy by freezing all of the Varroa that are inside the cells. Now obviously you're going to destroy a lot of drones, but it's important that we try to reduce the amount of Varroa that we've got in our colonies. And so if you're not using a Varroicide, then drone comb trapping is a very good way to try to reduce the numbers of Varroa in your colony. With the icing sugar method, you simply sprinkle icing sugar over the top bars and in between the frames, coating the bees. The bees then groom and hopefully dislodge the Varroa mites, which then fall through an open mesh floor. The only issue I see with that maybe is that the Varroa mites are still alive, so potentially could crawl back up into the colony, but it's another method that people have used and have said that works. So I'm not going to sit here and say don't do one method, don't do another, because I haven't tried them. What I would say is find a Varroicide or find a method that works for you. Talk to other beekeepers. If you have a mentor, then talk to your mentor and find something that works for you and your beekeeping and start using that. The one thing that I would say is do something. Don't just leave your bees and expect that they're going to be okay and allow them to die out because they're not the right type of bee to deal with Varroa. Make sure you're looking after your bees and implement some kind of integrated pest management system that will allow you to make sure you've got your bees nice and healthy for the summer. So we'll leave it there for this week. That gives you a flavour of some of the adult bee diseases that can infect your colonies. It's not all doom and gloom, and we can manage them, so don't be put off because there are issues that need controlling. I hope you find that interesting. Please do hit the subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed, and give us a thumbs up, and we'll catch up again next week with another Getting Started video. Don't forget, Friday we have our microscopy video series, and again on Sunday we'll have our Beekeeping Basics videos, and I look forward to sharing those with you over the coming weeks and months as we head towards and get into the new season. Thanks for watching.